Okay, well, welcome third grade for science. Today we're going to be starting to talk about living things. And so it's important that we know what makes a living thing a living thing. So on your screen, you're going to see me go through some slides that gives you some information about what makes something classified as a living thing. So let's think about this. To be alive, you can be a tiny little yeast that makes your bread get big and soft and airy, all the way to a tadpole, to an acorn, to a giant tree, to you and I. Those are all things that are living. So let's take a look at what makes us alive. There are different types of life cycles. We all go through the same life cycle. We start as babies, we grow to boys and girls, we become adults, maybe have children, and then eventually you die and the life cycle starts over and over. So this is kind of what a pattern of life would look like for anything that's alive. Birth, growth, adulthood, reproduction, and then death. So every living thing, from plants and animals to tiny little bacteria, go through those same life cycles. Begins at birth, ends at death. But the thing that changes is how long each of those life cycles goes. For example, a mayfly is really only an adult long enough to lay eggs. It doesn't even have time to eat anything before it lays its eggs and then dies. But on the other hand, you might have a sea turtle that can live for hundreds of years. You might have microscopic bacteria, which are teeny tiny bacteria that grow and reproduce. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. If you are alive, you're going to be born, you're going to grow, you're going to reproduce, and then you're going to eventually die. So what makes something alive? Well, to be alive, you must do these 7 life processes that we're going to go through, and you are going to be answering some questions on them. The first one is movement. All living things move, plants and animals. Animals have to move to find their food. We can't stand still and just expect food to come to us. We have to look for food. We have to go to the kitchen and get food. For example, animals have to go look for seeds. They have to go look for berries. They have to go look for grass. Some animals have to go hunt other animals. Some animals are decomposers, and so they only eat the rotting dead meat. Some animals eat only insects. Some animals eat a combination. On the other hand, plants also move, but they move differently than animals do. They use the sun's energy to make sugar in their cells, so they don't actually pick up their roots and walk somewhere else. But what they do is they bend towards sunlight so they can get the most sun possible. And that's why plants seem to move toward a sunny place. The next phase of an animal's life cycle is reproduction. So once an animal has moved, the next thing that makes an animal alive is they have to be able to reproduce. Some animals do this by laying eggs. Some have live babies. There are actually animals that grow off their parents almost like a sponge. So what happens is the baby grows off the parent on the sponge, and eventually it's got all of its parts, so it just breaks off and becomes an adult. Birds, fish, and reptiles, most reptiles lay eggs. Amphibians will lay their eggs in the water, and there are mammals which have live babies. On the other hand, plants also reproduce, but they reproduce very different than an animal. Plants will produce seeds or spores that will grow to exactly like their parent plant. Sometimes you might find seeds in fruit, like apple seeds. Sometimes you see seeds in tough outer shells, like an acorn. The third thing that makes all living things alive is that they're sensitive. So animals react to their environment. What that means is that as it's getting colder outside, you and I aren't dressing the same as we dressed maybe back in July. We add layers of clothing. We wear shoes instead of flip-flops. As it gets even colder, we put on a coat because we are sensitive to changes. Well, other animals are sensitive as well. Think about this. When winter comes, bears, they go hibernate. They know it's time to go hibernate. Or if an animal senses a predator nearby, it runs and hides away from the predator. If an animal is somewhere where there's not a lot of food, they don't just stay there and die. They go look for a place that has more food. Plants are also sensitive to their environment. They react by adapting what they need so they can live in a lot of different places. So for example, the cactus has adapted itself so that it can live in a really dry climate by not allowing water to escape it very easily. Other plants that have adapted to living in the hot environment are things like flowers in the desert. What they do is they close up when it's hot and they open up in the morning when it's cooler. The fourth thing, so all animals have to be able to move, reproduce, they're sensitive, and we have to have nutrition. We need to eat food. So animals have to eat the foods that contain nutrients we need to survive. We don't drink all of our nutrients. We don't have all of our nutrients inside of us. So what happens is we eat the food that has those nutrients, and then our bodies do the job, and they break it into smaller parts that the different parts of our bodies can absorb and use. But plants also have to have nutrients. They get their food and their nutrients from the sun's rays, and this really fancy scientific word called photosynthesis. That's the process this happens. And what happens is as the sun hits the plant's leaves, it will create the sugar that the plant is able to use for energy. So we move, we reproduce if you're alive, you're sensitive to things, you need food. And the fifth process that living things do is they need to excrete. And this is the gross one. What goes in has to come out, boys and girls. So animals have to go to the bathroom to get rid of the waste. They have to get rid of the things of their body, the parts of the food that their bodies don't need. Plants, they also have to get rid of waste, but theirs is very different from how an animal does. Sometimes what they do is they might release their waste into the air or into the soil. Sometimes they store it in older leaves, and then when the leaves die in the fall and fall off the tree, they take the waste with them. But either way, both plants and animals have to get rid of that waste. So we move, we reproduce. If you're alive, you have to be able to reproduce. You have to have, you have to be sensitive to your environment. You have to need nutrition. You have to get rid of waste with excretion. And the sixth life process that all living things do is breathe. It's a fancy word called respiration. All living things need air. A lot of animals will use their lungs to take oxygen from the air, and it goes into our body, and our bodies use it. Some animals have gills, and they're able to get oxygen out of the water. And there are even some animals that are able to absorb oxygen through their skin. Now, plants, they don't need oxygen, actually. They need the opposite. They need carbon dioxide in order to breathe. So what happens is they take in all the yuckies that we breathe out. So we breathe out all this carbon dioxide that our bodies can't use. And plants breathe that in. They take that carbon dioxide in, and then they give off the oxygen that you and I need. So you can see why plants and animals, we need each other to survive. And then the seventh life process is that animals have to be able to grow. Think about this. Butterflies, they actually start as caterpillars, and then they go through this whole process where they become a butterfly. You and I, weren't born looking like this. We may have looked similar to what we look like, but we were much, much smaller, right? We've grown bigger and taller to become adults. Baby fish, when they're born, they look just like their parents. And that happens. Some animals look just like their parents, others do not. And then plants, they also grow, but they grow differently. So plant seeds will break open, and that's called germination. The sprout will go into the soil, will grow roots, and then it will start to come up out of the soil into the sunlight. And it looks like this picture down here, and that's called germination. So all living things follow the same life cycle, okay? They're born, they grow, they become adults, sometimes they reproduce, and then they eventually die. But regardless of where they are in this pattern, all living things follow the same 7 basic life processes. They are able to move for food and water, or for other reasons to escape predators. They are able to reproduce. They are sensitive to the environment around them, so they change and adapt. They need food or nutrition. They get rid or excrete waste. They breathe with respiration, and they grow. So boys and girls, there is an assignment that's part 2 that you need to go and take a look at, that you're going to fill in and answer some questions about these 7 life processes. You can come back to this PowerPoint anytime you want to this video so that you can see it and that you can rewatch it and find the answers. And if you have questions, you can ask Mr. Rush or I. Thanks.